avant-garde.
All right, welcome to Torture Garden. I'm Scott,
I'm Jimmy.
and today we actually weren't, anticipating doing another career retrospective so soon, but unfortunately, we had the recent passing of one of Can's co-founders, Holger Czukay.
Yeah,
He
don't even ask me how to pronounce
yeah,
that.
but he um he was actually found dead in the original Can studio, which is apparently formerly a movie theater, and that's where he was living. So like that's kind of a really interesting combination of things.
Yeah.
But we thought, you know, Can and krautrock in general is, I think, an unfortunately overlooked to an extent. I mean, obviously it's still prevalent. People who really dig into history of rock music will appreciate it, and you could find a lot of modern bands like King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, and I think DIIV. Um, kind of use some krautrock influences, and there's different bands that use influence from krautrock. But they're one of those movements in rock music that had such an incredible influence on the evolution of a wide variety of genres. It really doesn't get
Mm.
talked about as much as a lot of other movements. I mean, it's certainly depending on the album or then the band can be tied into psychedelic rock and whatnot. There's definitely a lot of tie-ins there. But I mean, I think eventually we might have talked about Can as a career retrospective, and I'm glad kind of had, unfortunately under these circumstances, but a way to celebrate Can's career because it really was incredibly influential, and one of their albums is among my favorite rock albums. I don't
Tego
know,
Mago.
yeah, Tego Mago.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because you know krautrock is, and this is going to sound pretentious, but I think this is accurate. It's kind of more of a approach to writing music than you know necessarily what it sounds like to an extent. I mean, there's a lot of music that's like lumps in the krautrock category that kind of sounds relatively different, and even in Can's discography, I mean, a lot of what they did, was very, wasn't just repetitive rock, which is essentially, the underlying definition of krautrock is this kind of meditative, rock music rooted in psychedelic rock roots, and then it just repeat. It's basically if psychedelic rock went to German boarding school. That's how I describe it. It's like that kind of freewheeling spirit, but very regimented. It's kind of an interesting dichotomy that led to some very interesting albums. But I kind of want to hear your take on krautrock. Jimmy.
Um. Well, so I don't know. I personally, when I look back at rock music, I think I would probably say krautrock is probably the single most important rock movement
Hmm.
there is. Just because we I think we've sort of talked about this before on our own. But like part of the reason like bands like Velvet Underground were so important was because they met the they sort of were like a halfway point
Hmm.
between the avant-garde classical movement that was going on at the time and traditional rock music.
Hmm.
And I think that this dichotomy is like pulled up to the extreme when it comes to
Yep.
krautrock.
Absolutely.
And I think part of that has to do with the time and place that it took place, and we're talking about post World War II Germany, where there were people who were so against the Nazi Party that we're talking about like that they just wanted this violent explosion of new music
Hmm.
that was nothing like previous German music was. And I think that fueled a lot of it, but I think part of it has to do with I think it mostly has to do with that meeting of the avant-garde and rock music,
Hmm.
because you don't really hear that beforehand as much.
Yeah.
But and I mean, I think Velvet Underground definitely came before these guys, and Zappa came
Yep.
before these guys, but I think these guys did more. I personally feel with it than either of those guys.
Hmm.
Like because I look at like just sonically the way Can makes their music, or even Faust,
Yep.
and it's so much different than any other band out there, and the way they meet these sounds, like, when I listen to like a Frank Zappa album, sometimes you'll see a lot of his influences come through, but it isn't always there. Like it's more like, oh, he'll do an album of classical music, oh, and then he'll do like, he'll finish off Freak Out with like, that whole Return of the Sun and Monster Magnet, which is like all like, weird electroacoustic tape editing,
Hmm.
you know. So it's never combined and really like blended into one single song. But that's what I think the beauty of krautrock is, that they sort of put it all together in these interesting ways.
Yeah.
And it's cool to see different bands do different things with it, despite there being like there definitely is a lot of similarities between krautrock bands, but I think they're only very they're very superficial.
Yeah.
Like, and I was trying to think about what would because when I was listening to all these Can albums, over the week, it occurred to me that there were a couple things that always were in common with each other, no matter which album it was, even if it was Monster Movie or what was it, Right Thing, the last one.
Yeah.
They all had this idea of rhythm too, but I think with Can especially is percussion
Hmm.
rhythm. You almost
Yes.
never hear like I go back to like Faust, with like Faust 4, the first track off that album, Krautrock, is like it's very hazy and cloudy and soundscapey, like sort of like Future Days in a little
Hmm.
bit, but it's not a well, but that track's rhythm is defined by his guitars, really,
Hmm.
because for me, that those are the most prevalent thing in that mix. With Can, it sometimes it depends how high the drums are in the mix, but the rhythm that the drums make is always there,
Yep.
no matter what. I think the other thing would be production. Like, it doesn't even matter which era of Can, you listen to. It's like they have such a unique production style that like you
Hmm.
just know it's them. And
Yeah.
I don't mean that in always a good way,
Yeah.
because I think sometimes it can come off really tinny and like sort of a very different from what you would want in a rock album.
Hmm.
But but I think it's so recognizable that I like that it makes up for it in a way. Like I
Yeah.
think it's cool to see a band using production like that, because you usually don't hear that in music in general. Like there are very few circumstances. Like I mean, like I think when we talk like hip hop, I think that's like a different type of production.
Hmm.
But like when we talk about rock music, like you rarely hear somebody do something different unless they're like one of those like lo-fi indie projects,
Yeah.
and even then, that like I wouldn't even put Can in the same place with that,
Yeah.
because just like I think for those lo-fi projects, that they're trying to get sounds out of you know out of that production that you don't normally get,
Hmm.
and sort of heighten the experience. While Can, I feel like, is just sort of just fucking around with everything. And I don't count that against them, because I actually really like them. I
Yeah.
really like that type of shit. So
Exactly. And
yeah,
I think
yeah,
something you mentioned earlier is an important point to touch on, is the fact that Velvet Underground was kind of on their own in a way in what they were doing, and Frank Zappa absolutely was, very unique in his,
yeah.
um, you know, what he brought to rock music and to music in general. I think the importance in why krautrock made such an impact is because it was a movement in a certain place. You look at the evolution of genres. With punk, you have the New York punk scene, you have the punk scene in the UK and whatnot. When you have these groupings of bands kind of pushing a sound forward, I think people latch onto that more. They latch onto the fact that this
Mm,
is something that's being created, something that they want to gravitate toward. Because with that, you often have a scene. You often have people who want to gravitate to going to shows. So it really becomes a cultural event, which is why it's so important. And a good example, another example is death metal. I mean, you had specific Swedish scenes that created a new sound. Then you had the Florida
yeah,
scene, a New York scene, and whatnot. you know,
Gothenburg.
I think
Yeah.
exactly and the Gothenburg trio and whatnot that help define certain sounds. And when you have such, not only do you have that in uh, krautrock, which obviously in Germany you have bands like Can and Kraftwerk and Neu and Tangerine Dream, Papa
Faust.
Boo and
Well,
Faust.
like I mean, technically, Tangerine Dream was part of like what was that other? I think like New
Well,
Deutsch. Music Kosmich.
yeah, but
Um,
they're still often like lumped into the krautrock category, and I think that
yeah,
they,
like I think the early stuff was supposed to be really krautrock. I really haven't given a lot of that a try. So
I don't think I've listened to a lot of Tangerine Dream, and I think it really does pin more on the kind of the repetition, the evolution of the composition and whatnot. That's really I think where they tie in. It's leaning on um, that side because they've never really had a rock music focus. I don't think. But the point I was making was is that the fact that you had all these bands operating around the same time, in the same area, doing really interesting things. I think that's why they had such an impact. To really can tie influences to a scene or because when you get into a new style, what do you want to do? All right, well, what else is there? Like when I got into when I first got into hip hop, for example, I just looked up every classic hip hop album, went to Newbury Comics, and just bought them out because I wanted to dive into it. So I feel like when you have all these bands coming up together, people check out Can. Oh, cool. Well, what else is there? And then you have a whole slew of other bands around the same time. Many that probably haven't even lasted the test of time. That probably remained underground, may not have ever recorded. Who knows? That's what happens in a lot of these scenes. Um, so when you're able to latch on to a sound like that and latch on to a scene like that, I think that's why it had such a lasting impact and why it was able to be so. Uh,
mm.
but
Yeah, no, I'm definitely with you there. I mean, you could one of my favorite scenes is the New York downtown
mhm.
music scene. Just because of the amount of like collaboration that happens between those two,
Yep.
where between the musicians in it, right, is just astounds me.
Hmm. Absolutely.
But yeah, no, I definitely get you there with that scene type of thing.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
um, it's hard to say. I'm trying to my notes. I'm guessing Cam was probably right at the forefront. I mean, they're one of the first. Just to kind of jump into their discography now. They, the crowd rock really started around the late '60s, and they formed. I think was '67 or yeah, they formed a '68, and then the following year they dropped Monster Movie, their debut, which so obviously we'll get to the rest of their discography later, but I had started with Tego Mago, and
Me too.
going back to Monster Movie caught me off guard, and I think Tego Mago as a whole we'll probably spend a lot of time talking about that. But Monster Movie was interesting because it's not 100% what you expect because Can is really billed as this very avant-garde band. And in a way, Monster Movie is a different approach to psychedelic rock, but it's not, and maybe it's just because of how much avant-garde music we've been able to consume, from our vantage point today. It seemed more like, your brother's weird friend's psychedelic rock band. It's like, oh, you like Hendrix? Well, listen to this. Like that's what it felt like, and it's enjoyable. I love it, and especially the last track being, this long psychedelic dirge. They would then um, continue to evolve that approach to writing music. But I think when I bought this on CD, you commented that this it wasn't one of your favorites. I don't know if I'm
Monster
misremembering.
movie.
Yeah.
I don't remember saying that, but all right.
Well,
I,
maybe
I,
I'm misremembering, but
I don't know. Listening to it, I think actually this was the first time I actually listened to it, so I
oh,
don't,
okay,
I maybe you're thinking of someone else, but
probably yeah.
yeah, uh, I thought it was cool.
Yeah,
You described it as what it was was it side A Tego Mago
pretty
basically?
much. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's pretty. Yeah.
yeah. I'd probably be with you in that. I enjoyed it. I didn't think it was horrible by any means. I think I should probably preface this entire conversation saying that, I while I didn't hate any of these albums, like except maybe like the very last one, because I was just so burnt out
Yeah.
and so canned out, really, and but I like while I didn't hate any of them, I can't really say that any of them really stuck out at me except for Tego Mago maybe, and even then it was only sometimes. Like I definitely think that when it comes to our levels of fandom for Can, I think you're definitely like the big guy when it comes to this. Just because I think while you were listening to Tego Mega over and over again and buying Monster Movie and Bamiasi and all those other ones, I was busy listening to Zorn, so
Mhm. Yeah.
I think if I'd given it more time earlier on, I'd probably be with you right about now. But I mean, believe me, I don't hate any of it at all because I when I think it was really cool to hear rock music that was even in its later days very forward thinking.
Yeah.
In very like I am a sucker for a really good guitar solo, and there is not a single Can album that doesn't have like a bitchin' guitar solo on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you know, so I really can't complain there. I just wouldn't put it in the upper echelons of something I'd be listening to. I mean maybe Tego Mago, maybe. So
Yeah, and I think Monster Movie is, I could definitely see at the time why it was, especially the length of that last track, that huge. I
oh
mean,
yeah,
it's like a focused jam band, and it's very interesting to, listen to music like this that was so influential and popular at the time. Um, Today, and try to recontextualize. Okay, why was this? Especially even Velvet Underground and Nico, as we talked about Velvet Underground before. If you listen to that album, today by today's standards, it's not particularly experimental. Uh, but if you think back to when it came out, for a lot of people and a lot of mainstream rock fans, it probably was very bizarre. Um,
yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I think yeah, Monster Movie is a pretty weird album when you compare it to its peers at the time.
yeah. Hmm.
It definitely stands out. As a little. I think part of that is because of the fact that I think they improvised a lot of what they did.
Hmm.
But I think also part of it comes from just their strange influences that Suzuki actually like I mentioned to you earlier, he studied under Karlheinz Stockhausen, which is I find that really cool.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's
But
pretty cool.
and I'm not sure how much you can hear that influence there. As strange as that sounds, like I honestly found that if we were gonna compare Can to any sort of modern classical movement, I would think more minimalism than anything.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, but I think the one thing that probably turned me off of Monster Movie in a sense, and I'm saying this as someone who genuinely thinks it's a good album. I think that the vocals, the not necessarily the vocals themselves, but the way they structured the track is sort of a weakness.
Hmm.
Because if you look later when like Damo Suzuki, or is that his name? Yeah. Uh,
Um,
yeah, Damo Suzuki. Yeah. Well, when he was doing, those when he was doing vocals for Can, I think that was sort of their peak. But I think also it's worth mentioning that like, with him on vocals, it's not the traditional the vocals control everything in a rock band type
hmm.
of feel. Like, and see, that's what I got from Monster Movie was that everything sort of hinged on what the vocalist was doing, even if it was just random shit. You know, so like I sort of like when they loosen it up and like it's almost like the vocals are more like an effects, like or
Yeah.
just like another sound effect to put
I
on the track. So
I totally agree because, and I think Lauren, my girlfriend, can really attest to this. What track? I think it's the second track where he's screaming, "You made a believer out of me."
yeah.
Um, Lauren fucking hated that song. Oh my god, she thought it was so annoying. She hated the lyrics, and I think in general throughout Can's career, I'm definitely in agreement with you that when they use vocals as like sound effects or as part of like kind of the atmosphere of what they're doing, it's a little bit better because as you're kind of alluding to, they weren't a traditional rock band. So when
Mm.
they do try to have semi normal rock lyricism and rock delivery, it just feels bizarre. It doesn't really, not I guess not bizarre, but just it feels off. It doesn't
Yeah.
doesn't feel like it works 100%. It's not terrible, but just
No,
it's
no,
not.
it definitely isn't. I liked Monster Movie, so
Yeah, I do too. It's just it'd be kind of like if like a death metal band had like a hardcore vocalist. It'd be like, oh, this is odd. It doesn't really fit. It seems like
actually I would listen to that.
it'd be interesting, yes, but it would
Yeah.
seem a little off at first, and maybe it would work. But I think the following album, which was really more of a compilation album called Soundtracks. I guess they had
Yeah.
done various songs for different underground movies and whatnot. I think it pretty much fall in line with Monster. I mean, I don't think there's a huge difference from what Monster Movie was doing. Obviously, there were more tracks on the album. They were shorter in some instances, but I can't say it was a huge shift in sound between the
I,
two.
I would say because I think Tego Mego comes up right after this, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would say that Soundtracks is closer to Tego Mego than
Yep.
Monster Movie, because I think that they finally sort of got away from that traditional structure in a sense,
Yeah.
and I think they were sort of playing around with structure as a whole. But I do have to say that Soundtracks is sort of a mixed bag for me, because I really like the experimentation that they do. But I can't stand how every track feels like it's unfinished.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that was probably purposeful. I think because you're only using like a snippet of the song in the movie.
Yeah.
So, but I couldn't stand that fade away because it was like, they like you could have done so many cooler things with it. Like there were some tracks on that I felt like could go for like another 4 minutes or 5 minutes, but
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing
just
is it's
premature.
weird. It's weird that they didn't do that. That didn't make just full tracks. Because it literally felt like, even when you have like a movie soundtrack. Well, obviously they're typically using previously released material for the soundtrack. But like
Yeah,
you wouldn't today release a movie soundtrack with just the snippets of the song from that were used in the movie as they were used.
yeah.
So I do say
I
it
don't
was kind
know.
of a shame that they didn't have the actual full extent of what they maybe planned to write.
Well, I mean, I think it's also worth noting that this is more of a compilation than it
Yes.
is like an actual studio album.
Yep. Hmm.
So like if it was a compilation, we could expect something different. I think, or like if it was a studio album, like I feel like the band would have probably gone back in the studio and tried to finish those songs.
Hmm.
But I think that they were probably doing something else
Yeah.
at that time. Which actually we could probably figure that out in next year because there's not to completely break conversation, but there's actually a Can biography, the first official Can biography that's going to be coming out next year. So
Looking forward to that.
yeah, it's called All Gates Open. It comes out. I think it says it comes out April 1st. But I put that in my that's what I put in my calendar. I don't know if that's going to be real or not
and
because
and
I
they might expedite it now, to because of what happened, the fact that he passed away. Um.
I don't know about that because like I've been looking for this. There's this new edition of Divided Soul, the David Bowie biography that's
Hmm.
supposed to include his death and
Yeah.
everything, and it has been pushed back to the point that you can't even find it because it doesn't exist.
Huh.
Like I swear to God, I pre-ordered this thing in June, I think, and it was supposed to come out in July, and then it said it was getting pushed back to September, and so I canceled my order, and then I got it from I think I did it from Target, and then they were like, yeah, we overstocked, or we understocked for this thing, so it's gonna be a while still, and I ended up canceling that order, and now I just can't find it anywhere. So
Jeez,
I,
that's bizarre.
yeah, you never know when it comes with these books, like so I mean I usually like to pre-order them ahead of time just so I can get a copy.
Yeah,
But yeah, nonetheless, I think that that's a book worth checking out for anybody who's even interested in krautrock. There are other krautrock books out there, but I would count this one pretty high.
yeah,
So
yeah. Definitely anticipating that.
yeah,
And I'm sure, to kind of segue, that book will cover quite a bit about Tego Mego, which I think is
yeah.
widely it's interesting. The next three albums we're going to talk about, I think, are relatively even in the weight people put on them, but I do think Tego Mego typically comes out on top as Can's best album.
Yeah.
I bought it on vinyl. It was double colored vinyl. One was blue, one was purple, really cheap. And I heard that they were a good band, so I was like, oh, why not? Bought it off of eBay. And I have to say, this is essentially, this album could be called the Tale of Two Sides. Um,
Oh yeah.
because after finishing the first LP and then going to the second LP, it was like, what the? And I'm sure people who listened to Can after like everything that they put out so far, and then once they got to that second LP, like, fuck is this? Like,
You
what?
know, this is weird, but like, since you listen to it on vinyl, and you have like basically like a track aside almost,
Mhm.
um, listening to it as a whole uninterrupted, it's strange how much it sort of ends up blending into it a little bit, like. It like you could there's a point that you can tell, oh yeah, this is definitely like side B,
Mhm.
but at the same time like it's not completely unexpected, like it doesn't just come out and just slap you in the face.
Yeah.
Like I definitely expected it more this time, and it was, I thought it was a cool little like blend near the end of the first side to the second side, of just how you could hear it sort of going in that direction, like just trying, but then sort of hitting a wall, and then finally just side B just breaks on through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, Tego Mego is, I really enjoy Tego Mego. I think probably my favorite thing about it is I would say either the production or the vocals in it, because I really love Damo Suzuki's like passion and energy that he brings to each song.
Yeah. Sure.
Um, yeah, because like I'm thinking of like Hallelujah, that like he's just he's sort of just going nuts at
Yeah.
some points, or like what's that track in side B where he's just like blah, 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 blah.
It's the I forget it.
Oh yeah,
It's the second one on the second
is he
LP. The
Aumga or
yeah,
whatever?
the first track is just like that big wall of sound, and just kind of the ambient stuff, and then it's like, yeah, and then once it gets to that track, you're like,
Yeah,
I'm glad I was listening
I
to it.
love that.
I'm glad I was listening. Actually, no, no, no. I was listening to it. So I have my own turntable, and then my parents have like a tape deck set when I still lived at home, and I was
Yeah.
started listening to it in my room, and then once that started playing, I was like, okay, I gotta go downstairs. This is not gonna fly. My mom's gonna be like, what the fuck are you listening? So I ended up going downstairs to listen to it, and it really did catch me off guard. And I think you do make a good point that it is likely due to the fact that I've really only listened to it on vinyl. I don't think I've listened to any other format, but having kind of that slight, because when you have many sides of vinyl, it really compartmentalizes your listening. Um, but even saying that, it is a jump. It is
Oh yeah.
very interesting to suddenly go into what into what is essentially just avant-garde music. It just they never
Yeah.
really full-fledged had gone into that specific territory until then, or to the degree that they did. Um, but even before then, you know, the first side is still relatively, they're evolving and approaching psychedelic rock in that really repetitive, unique fashion that is typical of the krautrock movement. Um, it's just it feels really different, even though you can tie it to that psychedelic rock movement at the time. It did feel really different, especially that like 20-minute long Hallelujah, right?
Yeah.
That I mean that's um
It's
yeah I mean
I I like this. So
yeah
it's
I
just-
mean that's something that first listening to it you have to get used to, because
yeah.
when you're first getting acclimated to any track, it kind of, you don't finesse out all the details on first listen. But the more you finesse out the details, the more you see how they did evolve it, and it feels warranted that it's 20 minutes, like the way that they slowly, built it up. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, I remember when I first listened to Tego Mago on your recommendation, and you were like, "Dude, this thing's so fucking
yeah,
experimental. Like, you
yeah,
got to get on this." And I'm like, first track, I'm like, "What the fuck, Scott?" Like,
yeah, yeah,
I think I was like legitimately pissed. And then, but like once I got to like the second time, I'm like, okay. But for a while, like that first half still stuck in my craw. I really like it now because I think it's sort of like a cool preface
yeah,
for
absolutely.
something cool later. I think just again, Damon Suzuki just makes that album. I don't think it would not be even close to the same album without his input.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think anyone, this is probably the best place to start just to get a handle on. I mean, if you're really, if you're not, privy to avant-garde music, or you're not really that into, huge experimentation, maybe Monster Movie would be the better place to start. But if you're really,
Actually, could I make a recommendation? Because I personally think that Ege Ben Miyasi, however you pronounce that, the next album, might be a better gateway for Can.
yeah, I could see that for sure, actually.
Because like the tracks are a little shorter. It's not like a double album, but it still has a little bit of that weirdness
Yeah, that's true.
that side B of Tego Mego has. And then it also has some of the Can's biggest singles on it too. So
Which
I
we will get to, because I
yeah,
I was not. I, we'll get. Never mind.
yeah. Are we getting there now?
might as well. So, that's a good enough segue. So, listening to this, there is a song. I forget which one, but the one that
Is it
the
Spoon?
no, going in a girl. Do you remember? Know which one I'm talking about? It's the
No.
da na 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 na. Oh God, I gotta look it up. Um, Kanye West sampled Can.
Huh.
He did, because
It
that
doesn't
came on.
surprise me.
Well, okay, so he kind of lifted it and made it. So I have to find it. But it was a big, a little bit of a shock, that he did that. I guess it shows how much of an influence Can has that we don't think of. That more people know about them than uh, we give
Yeah.
credit to.
Oh, it's vitamin C.
Think so, yes. So, um, anyway, while I'm finding, this this song, yeah, I think that song that immediately caught me off, not caught me off guard, but it kind of, because I actually had not listened to Beyond Take Omega before. I'd always wanted to listen to,
Yeah.
this album, and then Future Days specifically. Um, but it really did feel like a good synthesis of the two sides of Take Omega. And I think you're right to point out that it might be a better starting point. It was interesting to hear, what I had always envisioned, because I'd only listened to Take Omega as LP1, LP2, side A, side B, and to hear those two sounds really kind of like mashed together in a really intricate way. I was a big fan. I really loved this album. I'd say, I kind of want to listen through again to Can's discography because I really can only give
Hmm.
each one, one or two listens. But
Yeah, I did the same thing. I listened to Take Omega twice, but that was it.
yeah, and I think this might have become one of, if not my favorite of theirs, just because of how, um, I don't know, just because of how it really did strike that balance. I guess is the best thing I can say about it. I think you know maybe not so much once you get into their later discography, but they always have something interesting to say, regardless of what they're doing, the psychedelicness, the avant-gardeness.
Yeah.
But the fact to hear like both at once and synthesized the way to the level it was. Yeah, I mean, I love this, and I'm glad I finally got around to listening to it because
Yeah, but me too, because I've always been interested in this album, mostly because of the album, the album
yeah.
cover. Because I just like I'm looking at I always look at it, I'm like, who the fuck would use a can of okra as as a fucking album cover? Like,
uh,
come on, pick a good vegetable. Uh,
Also, I
uh,
found it. So it's "Drunken Hot Girls" off of "Graduation" by Kanye West, and it samples uh,
Vitamin C.
Sing Swang Song from
Okay.
Can from uh, yep. So it was track two from Miyasi. Because I'm listening
Yeah.
and I'm like, wait a second, like I know that melody. It's from it's from an egotistical rapper. I know. I was like, I know that because obviously the lyrics are not "Drunken Hot Girls" on. I don't think. Uh, but
Yeah.
the melody is the exact same.
Oh yeah, I mean, you gotta give it to Kanye. I mean, despite his, predilections towards egoism, he does, he gained a name for sampling some really off the kilter shit,
And I mean, no, I mean he's
and
not
doing
not
it
to get
well too.
yeah not to get off too big a tangent,
Yeah.
but I think what eventually, because I used to be a huge Kanye hater, what really got me into his music, I'm not like a huge fan overall, especially the newer stuff, but I really do enjoy a lot of music. It's because he is really inventive at sampling. Uh,
Mm.
a great example is "Gold Digger," the fact that he sampled that Ray Charles song that had a completely antithetical meaning where it actually was about how good his girl was, and then he used Ray Charles from you know the movie Ray that was coming out at that time, and to sing the hook. So he is really inventive, and it was really interesting to see of all the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon I expected to happen. I did not expect to tie Can to Kanye West. So
I don't know.
um,
It doesn't really surprise me considering like Power samples King Crimson. Like,
yeah, that's fair. So
yeah,
I guess if you take anything away from this episode, Kanye West loves some prog rock and loves some
yeah,
krautrock. Um,
yes, he does.
but yeah, I think to really kind of cap off this section, I do think this might be a better debut or a better entry point for people
Gateway.
because
Yeah.
it does kind of synthesize um, those two worlds.
I would note that I still think that Tego Omega was the better album, but I think Ege is probably easier.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
but so I how after Future Days or so
Yeah. So
yeah, let's do Future Days.
interestingly enough, Future Days reminded me a lot of Tangerine Dream. It felt a lot more
I could see that.
soundscapey, and it was
Yeah.
interesting because, uh, it strayed away a little bit from that rock format. Uh, it started to stray more into some ambient stuff, and it was one of the first. Actually, no. I'll save this comparison for later because I think it's more fitting. There's a specific band I think that they really reminded me of. Anyway, I do think that this is this is a good album. I really do like Future Days. I think it's different and interesting um, in the way that it starts to even eschew rock music more, and I think they do go into a lot of different directions in the latter half of their career, as we'll talk about.
Yeah, Future Days is good. I was sort of I don't know. I wish there was just a little more substance to it.
And
Because
longer. For me, it was too short.
yeah,
Because one of
exactly.
the things, and sorry, I'll let you finish.
No, no,
This is
that's basically what I was gonna say. So,
speaking of fun, Kanye, I'll let you finish, but um, you get that reference?
oh yeah, yeah, it took me a
Okay,
second.
I I'll be here all week. Don't worry about
God,
it.
shut the fuck up.
Um, but that's one of the reasons that Tangerine Dream's album works so well because they let these soundscapes really go. I mean, Zeit is one of their best albums, and I think every single song is around 20 minutes. There's four of them, but it really,
Yeah.
each composition really evolves on itself and becomes its own beast. So I think Can could have really could have lended themselves to maybe an extra 10 minutes, an extra because it's only about 40 minutes long. An extra 10 or 20 minutes probably would have helped this, and to kind of dig more into those compositions. And
See, that was more about what I feel like it could have still kept the same, track listing, the same runtime, but I would have liked to see just a little bit more of just diving into the spirit of each song because they have something that's really cool on it. It's just that like it just doesn't get quite there.
yeah, no,
So
I think that's fair.
yeah, it's a good album, but it's a little flawed.
Yeah,
So
but I mean,
uh
like I said, as a big fan of Tangerine Dream, it was interesting to hear them kind of reaching for that that early ambient electronics stylings. And like I said, having never or having really only gravitated towards first Take Omega and then Monster Movie in terms of the albums I listened to, it's really cool to dive more into what else they did to hear what other experimentations they did, and of
oh yeah.
course we'll get into that in the latter half of their career.
Yeah, I
But
it's also worth mentioning. I mean, just again, the album cover. I really like Future Days' album cover. Just as a
yes,
personally like a big fan of Art Nouveau. I thought it was a cool, homage to that.
yep,
So,
I like that too.
uh, but now we come into
Yeah.
post
So
Future Days can.
so as you know, we're going to be linking Spotify for those two type of videos, and if you notice on this one, we've only included the first five albums, and there's a couple reasons for that. I think the first is primarily that in terms of what is collectively understood as essential can, it really goes from Monster to Future Days, and well,
Mm,
I don't 100% agree with that. I think I would draw the line, a little bit later in their career. I can understand why after a while, because you know I was familiar with the first five albums before this podcast. So when you're listening to it, I was like, all right, cool. Well, let's dive into the albums I haven't heard about. And there's a lot. There's so
yeah.
many. Like I didn't realize. So I was like, oh, okay. I've heard Take Omega before, heard Monster before. So I really only had to listen to soundtracks, Future Days, and then Miyake. I was like, oh well, how many other albums could possibly have? One, two, three,
Two,
four,
three,
five,
four,
six,
five,
seven.
six, seven.
They had seven other albums, and not to say that I mean, obviously critics have their favorites and whatnot, but there are bands that they'll cover like the whole gamut of their career, and I think there's a good enough reason why many of these albums are not spoken about. Um, I
Yeah.
but for me, to I think we'll just have more an open conversation about the entirety of their
Yeah.
the back catalog. For me, I really enjoyed Soon over Babaluma. I liked the more they're bringing like that jazzy styling into a little bit, kind of that almost Mediterranean Arabic, kind of that area of feeling of jazz. I like that. Landed was cool too. And I think what's interesting to me is from this point on in their career, I got a huge Talking Heads vibe. I started to really, really, get. And they were contemporaries at this point in their career. Talking Heads' first album came out in '77, and um,
Well, Landa was 75.
yeah, well,
So,
because Talking Heads, I think they formed in early '70s. Their first album came out in '77. So yeah, Talking Heads formed in. If my mouse would work, no, okay, my mouse doesn't want to work. So I don't know when Talking Heads formed. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Okay, it's back. It's not working. Anyway, oh, there we go. Okay, all right, it's gonna stay here. So Talking Heads formed in 1975, and that's around the same time that Landed came out. So
Yep.
I guess I'd never made the connection before. I think that Can was definitely a big influence on Talking Heads, and it was interesting to hear how they really brought in those like world elements, brought in the funk, avant-garde, a little more here and there in different ways.
The reggae on the self-titled
Yeah,
album.
yeah. But all that said, I think, and obviously, full disclosure, we had to listen to a lot of albums in a short period of time because we actually had a different topic in mind for this week's podcast. And then,
Yep.
after he passed, we wanted to talk about Can. We had to quickly kind of go to discography. Flow Emotion, I started to check out. For me, I just it felt really like I think Talking Heads are able to do what they do in an interesting way. The world music vibes and the different things they bring in. Especially a great example of that is Brian Eno and David Byrne's collaboration.
Yeah, My Life
You
in the Bush of Ghosts,
Thank you.
man.
You always remember the exact title, and I always fucking forget.
I I I,
Um,
I love that album.
it's a
So
great album.
yeah.
But I think there's a way to use world music that is interesting and doesn't feel like what your hippie aunt plays when she meditates. Um, and
How did you know my hippie aunt meditates?
well, I have one too, so don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, especially on Flow Emotion. Then after that, it did not work as well. I mean,
Yeah.
like I said, I don't think any of these albums are like bad. I don't think they're
Um,
terrible.
I,
Um,
I I think maybe Right Time is probably the only album in Ken's entire career that I would say is bad,
yeah,
or at least probably the worst.
I can totally see, and I
And
think, I
just
mean,
part of that was just the vocals. Oh my god, the vocals are so bad. Like, and isn't like I think they had the original singer back for this
um,
album too.
let me just check real. I would Wikipedia.
Yeah, this
Yep.
I
So, Malcolm Mooney left the group in 1970 after Monster.
yeah. Like, oh my god, why would you? And then just the way he brings back that structure too. It just felt like, you know, I hate to say it's about Cam, but it was almost like a dad rock type of shit
Yeah.
going on.
Well, and
Like,
I think that's the pro is first of all, I mean that just was a recipe for disaster in the
yeah,
first place because it coming back from a hiatus is always tricky, and then working with people you haven't worked, the original vocalist they hadn't worked with since 1969. So
yeah,
to have trying to get that
20,
chemistry
20
back
years later.
together, that 20 years later, and then 10 years after you released another album, your previously released album, and also just
Yeah.
1989, like that just was not. I mean, krautrock really had run its course by that point in terms of like popularity and really the movement itself. And
Mm.
I think that I'm sure that Can fed off the scene and like they were vibrant and young. There's always room for disaster when you have any of the formulas that led into that album. But still, like I said, I would probably move the line of Essential Can listening to after Landed. I really do think that Soon Over
Yeah, I can see
Babaluma,
that.
Soon Over Babaluma and Landed are both solid albums in their own right. Definitely prefer
I
Soon Over
yeah.
Babaluma, but
Yeah, I mean, I thought parts of Saw Delight I actually really liked.
mhm,
I thought the self-titled was actually really cool. Despite the reggae influence, I actually
uh-huh,
thought that was a cool. But I especially the track Animal Waves off of Saw Delight is fucking great. It's so weird to hear such a song so late in their career, but I really really like that track.
yeah,
So, but yeah, the rest of it is, yeah, like Landed had its moments, Soon Over had its moments. I even Flow Motion, I felt like had its moments. I mean, like
yeah,
they all really had their moments, except for really Out of Reach and Right Time, were probably the I was probably least receptive to those.
yeah,
I actually, but I think the biggest problem with later Can isn't exactly that it's bad, but it's just very forgettable. Um,
Yeah,
and
it's almost as if they reached a point in their career where they kind of more or less said everything they wanted to say to an extent.
exactly.
They kind of already, or at least they had said everything that they really was meaningful. They want to say like all like the big statements and everything they wanted to get out. And now they were just kind of making music for themselves, which is great. I mean, I think it's great when bands kind of. Uh, I don't think bands owe fans anything. If a band wants to make an album, that's their prerogative about what it sounds like. Whatever. If they stick to their old stuff, if they progress, or if they try something, who knows?
Yeah.
I don't think
Um,
they really owe anything to the fans, but I will say that after a while, I just feel like I wasn't getting anything I hadn't either gotten before or anything that really I went to Can for, or really I kind of wanted to hear from any bands. And I think context matters. If I, I try to think if there's an album I'm not really liking, it's like, am I tolerating this because it's a band I like? Would any other band doing this really, really
yeah.
do it for me? Because I think if like if someone played this and was like, "What do you think of this?" I think the fact it's Can probably helped me like it a little bit more than I would, out of that context. But it's still, I mean, like you said, Jimmy, other than maybe Out of Reach and Right Time, especially. I mean, these weren't bad albums. They weren't bad
Yeah.
albums by any.
I think like I mean I have a perfect example. Like yesterday I was listening to like the last, I think I was listening to everything from like Landed On, maybe
Yeah,
Flow Motion On, and like I remembered Solid Light, I remember Flow Motion, Landed, even the self-titled, even Right Time, but like Out of Reach, like I swear I listened to that entire album. I'm 100% sure I did, and I don't remember any of it, and I actually had to listen to it again yesterday
yeah,
just to make sure that I listened to it,
yeah.
and I just didn't remember a bit of it, and like it's just, yeah, it's like I can't stand that. Like I don't mind if if you're gonna make an album for you, go do whatever. I just wish that like there was something that I could actually grasp onto that I could actually remember,
Yeah,
in some
exactly.
of these, like but at least Animal Waves was fucking great, so.
Hmm.
Got to give him credit where credit's due.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think in general this is a good, um, this is a good reminder that just because critics say you only need to listen to these albums, and ironically we're telling you you only need to listen to a certain set of albums, but it doesn't mean. I mean, all of their albums are on Spotify. Everything is right there at your fingertips to listen to. So just because critics says, oh, you really only need to listen to this album or whatever, listen to the whole discography. If you have time and if you want it, listen to a deep cut. Um, there are deep cuts in a band's discography that I think are, and ironically I'm making that point. I can't think of any examples right now, but there are deep cuts in a band's discography that I think are better than the classics, or on par with the classics. Um, I really wish I had an example because now that's just a blank. Um, it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm trying to think of some too, and I really can't. Actually, no, I have a good one. Army Ants by Tom Waits, off of what was it, Bastards, Ballers, and Brawlers. It's like it's a later like collection of stuff,
yeah,
but people usually point to like Rain Dogs and Swordfish Trombones as like essential weights,
yeah.
but like Army Ants is a great song, and it's weird as hell.
Fuck man, I'm trying to think. Well, by the end of the episode, I'll probably think of something and I'll shout it out. But
Yeah.
uh, um,
What band were you trying to compare them to, by the way, earlier on?
oh,
Oh no, it was Talking Heads,
Talking
right?
Heads. Yeah, I got a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
huge Talking Head
I,
vibe, especially. Yeah, yeah,
I totally missed that.
yeah.
I didn't
Thanks,
realize.
thanks for
Yep.
thanks for listening, Jimmy. We're having a conversation.
No problem, buddy.
um, so
So,
that's
yeah.
really kind of you know Kant's discography in a nutshell.
Well, I mean, there's more to the collective than this. Like each of the members came out with solo work.
Yeah,
Suzuki came out with a like bunch of solo albums. So
yeah,
you know, I personally haven't listened to them, but I've
Yeah,
heard that they get a little weird, which I wouldn't mind checking out sometime.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the great things about these types of bands is that when you have this level of creativity and experimentation and whatnot going on, you'll often have members branch off into their own thing. You'll often have from there just disseminates into even more weirdness and experimentation. Which is
Mm.
why I think one of the even more valuable parts of uh, the experimental music is that it begets itself, I guess, if that phrase makes sense. It's when you have people coming together to experiment and make music, typically you have people that go from there and want to make more experimental music.
Yeah.
So I think it's great. It's great that they had the impact they had, and they were in the movement they were in. Uh, and I don't know. It's always weird to the fact that uh, Holger Czukay had passed away. Um,
Mm.
it's interesting when these kind of retired musicians pass away because it's not as if they were going to release they haven't released an album since 1989. So it wasn't like, oh, like it's sad that we'll never get another Can album because frankly we were never going to get another Can album. I don't think there's any chance we're going to. But it's just it's sad to think about someone who had contributed to the evolution of music, especially the evolution of experimental music people love. Is has passed on. Um,
Mm.
but I'm glad that in some way I was able to revisit and appreciate everything that he had accomplished, while he was here, everything that he had, been able to do, and everything Can had accomplished. Yeah, and especially, as I mentioned earlier, I'm really glad I this is the opportunity to dive more into their back catalog and realize that, not necessarily the 5 albums you told me to listen to are really, it. Um, so
They aren't it, but you could easily skip over them.
yeah, well,
At the same, just to be completely fair, um,
I'll
I
still
mean,
vouch for. I mean, I can give up Landed, but I really love Suno Rebel. I
okay. I mean,
really love that album.
I can give you Landon. I'm not like completely. I just think that like me personally, if I'm gonna put on a Can album again, it's gonna be Tego Mago. It's gonna be
Yeah,
Bamyasi.
yeah,
Maybe Future Days.
yeah.
So I'm taken from like that really like sweet spot era that they had. So,
That's fair.
but that's just me. So
No, that's absolutely fair. Um, so I think with that, like I said, we have a Spotify playlist in the description. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Can's music. What you think about their influence. Just any thoughts you have. And Jimmy, and any final thoughts?
um, I think it's worth saying that no band is perfect, and Can is a very good example of that. But nonetheless, they are one of the most important bands. So
Yeah, absolutely.
definitely, it's worth exploring if you love. If you already love like Tego Mago and you already love Monster Movie, it's worth checking out the other ones. Because you never know what you might like.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And,
yeah,
and especially, with the advent of streaming services and whatnot, there's really no excuse. It's easier than ever to really dive into what a band has to
absolutely.
offer in totality. So, thanks again for listening, and we will see you next week.
All right, see ya.
Bye.
Torture guard.